Hello there guys, Daniel Childs back here again for another podcast. Hope you're doing well and keeping safe on this Friday, wherever you're watching or listening to this on the podcast feed. It's going to be a mailbag today, just answering your questions that you submitted on my YouTube community page and also via my Twitter at SonOfChelsea. On the second part, I don't know how long we're going to be able to do that for. We will see. There may be other methods to ask questions, but for now, those are the two places I sort of get my questions from for these shows, which is good. If you are listening on the podcast, thank you so much for tuning in. Son of Chelsea is a part of the 90 Min podcast network. 90 Min, I know we're going to be doing a lot of content, obviously, during the World Cup. I may even be on some of the shows during the World Cup, so please stay tuned for that and the other podcasts and content that 90 Min are putting out. But on this feed, there's going to be more content surrounding Chelsea, reacting to what's going on in the World Cup. We've got some good guests coming on, particularly next week, regarding the Chelsea sort of YouTube scene, so stay tuned for that as well. And if you are watching on YouTube, I just want to say thank you, because we are getting closer to 30k subs. I think we're about 700 away, which is still a little bit, but amazing. We're so close to that landmark, and it would be a special way to end what has been a challenging year 2022. But let's get into your questions. Firstly, here from Chelsea Blue DS, who asks, having had two managers now with the same team, do you think that Tuchel was right about this team? Is it wholly on the players who don't do what the manager tells them to do? I think there is a bit of that. I always find the balancing act when we're sort of putting responsibility, I find it sometimes a little bit difficult, because if you're not in the dressing room, if you don't have sort of close information about what's going on and the relationship between a coach and the players, it's hard to know. I would say, just watching this Chelsea team this season, I don't reject the mentality sort of question or criticism towards this group of players. And I think it is a criticism you could have around a general group of players for several years, actually, particularly in the Premier League. I know we've had exceptions, a massive exception in the Champions League, where this group showed a level of, spirit and confidence and unity that was just kind of freakish in a sense compared to what you've usually seen from this group in the Premier League. That was strange, and I think mainly orchestrated by the brilliance of Thomas Tuchel, in truth, in retrospect, looking back at it now. And I think the big challenge for Graham Potter is, and the club, the new owners, is finding that mentality, that unity, that spirit, the right characters we're going to bring into this dressing room to try and rectify that. Players are obviously low in confidence. It doesn't look like a happy camp at the moment. It looks, for me, like players are a bit burdened at the moment. It feels like the weight is very much on their shoulders, and it almost feels like Graham Potter is a bit like that, even though he's only been in the job like just over a month, I think, or just over 2 months, something like that now. And that obviously needs to change. So I think there's a lot of factors there, but I do agree with you that the players need to take more responsibility. I think generally in the game, because we're interested in tactics now, and we're interested in data, and we're interested in coaches, like the sort of the cult kind of status or hero status now around like Jurgen Klopp and Pep Guardiola and the massive coaches in the game, maybe leads us to think that players are kind of like automatons and kind of like these robots that you just have to place in different positions, and they'll just do what you want them to do, rather than being human beings who have ups and downs, who themselves have to enact sort of those plans and have to show the right mentality in difficult moments. So I think that's a very relevant question, and I think Tuchel's criticism was valid. Heritwick asks, what project are we hoping to see if Potter is going to play a back five game after game, only to change into a back four as soon as we concede? How is he better than Tuchel? I don't think the back five, to me, I've seen more of a back five in the last 3 games compared to like the first, I guess, 10, where I think he was doing more interesting things, Graham Potter. If we're playing that way, and I said this in my Newcastle review, if you're playing that kind of reactive, negative football that really annoyed me and was just frustrating and not fun to watch in like the latter months of Tuchel's time here, then I don't see progress, absolutely. And that was my kind of problem. If you go back and watch some of my reviews of the last few Tuchel games, I think my problem with the way Chelsea was set up under him was I could not see how this system was going to progress Chelsea into a better, more prolific team. And that's something that Potter has to really evolve at Chelsea. The back three system, I do think, and I do wonder, it's not only what he did at Brighton, but this group of players, this current squad he has, are so used to playing this system. A lot of players have become used to it. A lot of players in our current group, of course, won a Champions League playing a 3-4-3, and he's got some success early on playing that system. I would like to see us move to a 4 eventually, but it's kind of the similar issue that Tuchel had, and I think previous coaches have had, where if you have limitations in certain key positions, if you have injuries to key players, I think there is a bit of pragmatism there, unfortunately. And that obviously needs to be changed. I think we need to sign a big central midfielder and hopefully can keep Reece James fit. I think those two things, and maybe different profiles in different areas, can hopefully lead us into a more progressive sort of system. But just because he's using a free, like there have been interesting ways he's used that free at the back, to be honest. I look at the Wolves game, I look at the Salzburg game away from home. A free at the back doesn't always have to be negative, but I do think at times it can very much lead into that, because you are taking an attacking player out and it can leave you, I think, a little bit short in that area, which is my concern. Inside asks, genuine question, not even trying to be funny, but what do you think has made our fan base into such unbearable, impatient, reactionary, spoiled little children? And do you think we have the most toxic fan base in the top 6? A lot of strong words there. I think there are factors within that, absolutely, and you can find people who will just be reactionary for a reactionary sake. I mean, if some people on Twitter were in charge of Chelsea, we'd be replacing the head coach, I think, every couple of weeks, and probably be selling and buying players every couple of weeks. I think a lot of it, and I do speak about this, and I don't think it's rubbish. I think the way fans of clubs are conditioned, I think, is very important and very much leads into the way they think about the game. Chelsea fans have been so used to not only seeing consistent success over the past 20 years, particularly my generation of Chelsea supporter who basically started watching when Robin came in and were very lucky and privileged to grow up watching that great Chelsea team, so became conditioned into that. Also becoming conditioned into when things are going wrong, you change the head coach and then they improve and we win something. But the fact that that hasn't happened with Graham Potter compared to, say, previous head coaches, it is maybe, messing with some people. The change in ownership too has made things a lot more uncertain. But I would say when you're talking about like toxicity of like the top 6 clubs, it's just because things are going bad at Chelsea at the moment. If you see bad runs when Arsenal have been in that with Mikel Arteta, for instance, who is a god to them at the moment, but if you flip back maybe 2 years, very different story. Same at Man United, same at Liverpool recently, Spurs too. You find a lot of similar patterns. So there are differences, I think, in the way supporters will view their club and their sort of expectations because of the history they've sort of experienced. But I think the toxicity thing is just general on social media, in my opinion, and you will find similar ways. It's just negative at the moment and feels more toxic because Chelsea are obviously performing poorly. Lucas asks, what dynamic does Nkunku bring to this attack? I feel that Nkunku is a really interesting player. Unfortunately got injured before the World Cup, which just, we're not even, players we're not even signing are getting injured now. It does feel like a bit of a curse. But what I like about him is that versatility, that he, in some performances I've watched of him, he can do different roles throughout phases of the game. He looks comfortable running in behind if you play the ball to him quickly, which is a problem that Chelsea have had with several attackers in recent years. I think he has the ability, a good enough technique to receive the ball in tight areas and do interesting things with it and be very effective. He's obviously a very cool finisher. I've seen that with him. He does remind me of some. I'm not going to reference them here, but there are some really good strikers in the Premier League that some of his finishes do remind me of, which excites me. And as I said, he can maybe drop a little bit deeper, which for a coach like Graham Potter, who, and for a lot of coaches, I think now, who want to be flexible, who want to use players in different roles against different opposition, and particularly with the group of players Chelsea currently have, you could see Nkunku fitting into a different sort of role. It's not that I want to see him playing right wing back, because it seems like Chelsea have to play everyone at right wing back now. But I feel that there could be interesting ways and very fluid ways is the easiest way to talk about it with Nkunku. And that excites me. And I do think creatively as well, some of his passes, like switches of play, I think could be quite devastating when you think about the runs that, say, a Reece James or Ben Chilwell could make in the future as well. So it's not just about what he's doing in the final third in terms of scoring goals, which he's doing a lot in his career at the moment. It's also those wider things within his game that I think makes him a well-rounded player that could still be developed further at Chelsea. RJ asked, what does your version of success look like for our club come season's end? I think this is a massive question for not only me to answer now, but I also think for the club heading into January. What do they want from this season? Because if they're hell-bent on getting Champions League football, which I think the majority of Chelsea fans want and expect, then I think that will very much inform the January transfer business. I think Chelsea will may look at more instant signings or players that they feel can give them a quick boost to get them across the line, a bit like what Spurs did with Antonio Conte last season, Kulusevski, Bentancur, big players who came in and very much improved that group of players and gave them a shot of confidence for a run late on in the season. And maybe that's what Chelsea will be looking to do. But then also, if they are committed to a real rebuild and a longer term project, there may be a fear, like maybe what we've done in the summer, is if you spend too much, you're just going to continually bloat this squad and make it even more complicated and complicate the work you have to do later down the line. And is there a theory, which I think Chelsea as a club have and a strategy the previous owners have gone for in the past two windows, is they look at the January window, don't see enough quality out there that's actually going to improve the first team, and wait until the summer. I think at the moment, though, there are some positions, as I've stressed on this channel, that I don't think you can wait much longer, particularly when you've got players like Kante and Jorginho out of contract, could feasibly both leave in the summer. So we can't have another Christensen-Rudiger situation where suddenly you're having to rush and get players in. If you can be proactive in some way for that, I think that's positive. So my expectations for the season, I think for me, we've got to be in the race for Champions League football. I think this squad is good enough to compete for that, at the very least. I really do, and I said that at the start of the season. I think it's going to be tricky because some teams have really improved, like Arsenal. But I still look at Tottenham and I still see a flawed group of players. Man United, I think, are going to have dips again. I think Chelsea still have enough quality to be in and around the top four conversation. I think if we're miles and miles away from it, that would be really depressing, and maybe there'll be a re-evaluation. I think if we're a couple points off it, I know people would still be disappointed at the end of that season, but it wouldn't be as disastrous. I think if we finish 10th, then obviously it's been a really bad season, but then that very much informs to me what we do in the future. I have to just be honest, and I know people won't like this answer. I don't see it as the end of the world not getting Champions League football if our style of play becomes a bit more consistent, if I start to see some of the younger players within this group get more minutes, and we're starting to develop those players and actually give them trust. The players who aren't going to be here for the long term are going to be phased out. And at the end of this season, which is what I wanted at the end of last season, I can look at a group of players and a squad that I can understand what they're trying to do on the pitch on a consistent basis, and I can see where it can go to in the future. Those two things I think are essential. If you don't have those two things, even if we get top four, I think there could still be some difficulties down the line. So we'll see about that. Pranchav asks, will you accept process without progress? This is kind of leading from the last question. I said this in the aftermath of the Newcastle defeat, and I truly do believe this. It's not just when I talk about long-term thinking and giving more patience to a head coach. It isn't just that coach has free will to lose 10 games in a row and it just be awful performances over and over again. And it doesn't matter how bad the situation is, doesn't matter how poorly the players are playing. But it is not having flip, and sort of extreme reactions constantly, which I think is just very natural with the way Chelsea works as a club. As I said, with Graham Potter, I think in the first 10 games, he was doing interesting things. I think he was not only getting some good results, but performances. I think we were seeing more creativity. We were seeing players put in interesting positions. I think we were seeing players like Mason Mount start to find some good form again. I think he's been hurt by injuries, but then also I think Potter himself maybe has been a little bit more safety first since that Brighton defeat. I don't know if he got scared by that Brighton defeat. That's just kind of my wild theory about it, and he seems to have reverted back to a low risk approach that I just don't think is going to help him in the long term and isn't going to buy him a lot of patience with supporters. So the process, you obviously want to see, as I've just said, you obviously want to see those building blocks. But I understand people's frustration when they see performances against Newcastle like that are really depressing to watch. The Arsenal one, I think, is the worst one of this season, particularly when you contrast Chelsea to Arsenal, where both clubs were, say, a year ago or even 2 years ago, and seeing how far they've come in that time. But then a lot of the Mikel Arteta story is reflected with, he went through some very, very bad runs where he could have been sacked, and that club gave him patience. They gave him time to reshape the squad. It's very easy now to look at Arteta and say, oh, Arteta's doing amazingly, why aren't Chelsea doing amazing? But actually looking at the difficulties he had as a head coach to get to this place right now, and it has taken a long time, and some very, very difficult runs where a lot of his supporters were questioning his position. And maybe that is going to have to be the case for Chelsea if they want to build something sustainable that is actually in the end going to make them compete, rather than kind of these short-term boosts where we may get a run like 6 months where we do really, really well like we did under Tuchel. But then there's nothing beyond that. The foundations aren't there to sustain a Premier League title challenge, for instance, which I think is what we all want to see in the coming years. But that is it for the mailbag today. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch and listen. If you did enjoy it, hit that subscribe button and a notification bell so you don't miss any of the uploads. Follow me on Twitter at SonOfChelsea, and I'll see you again very soon. All the best.